Hi there, my name is Herkef, and I spent 24 hours in one of Minecraft's most popular game modes, where you start off on a rather underwhelming island and are prompted to turn your rather underwhelming beginnings to something a bit less underwhelming, given that rather scuffed explanation along with the very obvious title of this video. I'm sure you were able to guess that I'm about to play Skyblock, but to my surprise, there is actually a new version of this map. I went online and found out that there is now something called Infinite Skyblock, which allows you to do a tiny bit more than you were before, as the Skyblock world can generate infinitely. However, since I am a very basic and unoriginal man, I decided to play the basic classic version of this map. But enough of my incredibly bad explaining, and let's get into what I did for 24 hours instead of doing something useful with my life. So I started off in a world that was basically just void, but with a few specks of random debris floating around. I chose to go for the classic experience and finished setting up my world where I would spend the next 24 hours. I then emptied my starter chest of all of its contents and got to punching all of the grass there was to be found on my underwhelming island, in high hopes that I would get a seed to prevent the rather gruesome death of starvation. But rather disappointingly, I didn't get any seeds, and with said rather annoying situation that was now seedless, I got to start dismantling the island that I had been plonked on so that I had something that I could use to expand said island. I also decided to leave a few pieces of grass so that it would be able to spread to the surrounding dirt. I'm not entirely sure why I did that, but growing older, I've realized that I do a lot of things for no apparent reason. I then expanded our now rather flat platform so that we wouldn't miss out on any of the juicy saplings that our tree would possibly decide to bless me with. Then started the authentic, and dare I say iconic, Minecraft experience of chopping down my first tree. But unlike many of my other worlds that I've played on, I then got on to the new activity of staring at the leaves in desperation to get a sapling so that I may experience the joy of chopping down a tree once more. And quite luckily, we did manage to get a sapling from our first tree, which slightly made up for the disappointment of not getting any seeds. I then wasted no time at all and got right to one of the most important aspects of this game mode, which is setting up our first cobble generator, as that will be one of our only ways of getting any building materials to progress. And with that, I also used my immense wealth that I had acquired from our tree chopping activities and crafted myself my first wooden pickaxe. But that pickaxe was rather quickly replaced by my first stone pickaxe, since I didn't particularly feel inclined to spend my time at a stone generator with a wooden pickaxe like a peasant. So I put a bunch of items, including my first wooden pickaxe, away in my chest so that I may look back at it in 24 hours and think to myself, that is a wooden pickaxe. I then got back to every Skyblock player's wet dream of mining cobblestone at my cobblestone generator, which, as you can probably guess, was the best time of my life. And once we had collected a full stack of cobblestone, I crafted all of it into slabs and built out a layer beneath my platform of dirt. That way, I could finally collect all of my dirt, which in this game mode is one of the most valuable items, which is a fact I find rather amusing. And after a bit of work, I had turned my blob of dirt into a blob of cobblestone. And after having been such a productive and good boy, I once again got back to mining cobblestone. Since we are in a later version of Skyblock, and not the one I played over 10 years ago, there were actually a pretty decent amount of other islands that I could pillar to. So once I had collected enough cobblestone to overthrow the school board of directors, I started pillaring towards an island with a spruce tree, not only to get my hands on one of the nicer looking wood types, but also to grab myself some sweet berries, which I hoped would counteract the inevitable starvation situation that was about to occur. And once I had pillared my way to the Spruce Island, I started grabbing everything I could and dismantled the island to completely drain all of the island's resources, just like an average Brit. And once I had successfully converted someone else's belongings into my belongings, I started getting rid of the evidence. However, soon thereafter, it turned to nighttime. So I decided that the evidence could remain until the morning, so I made my way back to my blob of cobblestone and expanded said blob of cobblestone so that I could reinvest the vast riches that I had just acquired. I then went back to mining cobblestone once again, as you do in Skyblock, and once it was daytime again, I went back to remove the ugly cobblestone strip that I had created as professionals have standards. I then spent an exorbitant amount of time switching between farming my precious spruce trees and grinding at the cobblestone generator, and after a while I'd gathered a pretty decent amount of materials, so I decided to set up a furnace array to start smelting my cobblestone. as cobblestone is rather ugly. At this point, we were in desperate need of a bed, since phantoms were now able to spawn, meaning we could get absolutely obliterated any second. But since we are playing Skyblock, we had one main option, which was to build a mob farm to get string, which we could craft into wool. However, since I wanted my Skyblock world to not look like a cluttered mess of random structures, I decided to build a platform for our mob farm in hopes of making it somewhat presentable. I also decided to make it circular, as that seems to be what everyone else is doing for some reason. I then wasted no time at all and went straight to building our mob farm. However, as I was building the mob farm, a few phantoms decided to spawn and harass me in the middle of my work. But with that rather unpleasant encounter, our mob farm was fully operational, meaning we now had access to a bunch of items that would make the rest of our stay a tiny bit better. One of the very important things we needed from our mob farm was zombified villagers, since that was the only way of getting a villager set up. So I went on to spend some time at my brand spanking new mob farm and extracted a couple zombified villagers and captured them using the supreme power of boats. I eventually also managed to get myself enough string to make a bed, which was very exciting. I then went on to spend a bunch of time at the mob farm with a new goal in mind, which was to acquire a potato. Up until this point, I'd been sustaining myself on an exclusive diet of sweet berries, which was starting to annoy me. So if I could manage to get my hands on a potato, I'd no longer have to spend an exorbitant amount of time just eating. But unfortunately, I had no luck in my potato-centered quest. And with that disappointing failure to acquire spuds, I decided that it was time to expand our circular concept by building yet another circle. But this time, I left the inner part empty, as it was going to be the center platform which I had other plans for. And once I had finished the center platform, I got to work making yet another platform, as I needed a space to do my farming. And once all of that platform building had been dealt with, I started work on our soon-to-be farming area. But since my level of affluence left a lot to be desired, I could only afford to make one out of the 4 farms that I planned to make. I then came to the rather annoying realization that you couldn't bone meal dirt to get tall grass to grow. But luckily, I had still saved a couple pieces of grass on my peasant platform, so I was still able to get seeds, which would have to do until I got my hands on some potatoes. So with my wheat farm now fully completed, I went back to my mob farm, once more in hopes of getting my hands on a potato to bring me out of my misery. But instead of potatoes, I got an instantly exploding creeper. Twice, which led to my first death in this world, which was rather embarrassing. After that rather gruesome and very much avoidable death, I decided to do something more safe and created my first Nether portal. I then got back to the uncomfortably recurring act of mining cobblestone with very much subpar tools, as we needed cobblestone for our gold farm that I was about to construct. I did have a decent amount of wood from all the spruce chopping I had been doing, but I figured that it might be a good idea to not make my farm in the Nether flammable. I then got to constructing a gold farm that I had found on YouTube, which was apparently made for Skyblock. The reason I needed a gold farm was because I needed a few things from bartering. One of those things was gravel, as you can combine dirt with gravel to get coarse dirt, which you then can convert back to normal dirt, which seemed like a rather sound get-rich-quick scheme. I also wanted potions of fire resistance, as I would eventually have to go and get blaze rods from a nether fortress if I want to beat the game, and I figured that it would be nice to not be flammable when fighting a mob that sets you on fire. I know, I'm a genius. However, we would also need gold for golden apples to cure our zombified villages to commence with the child-friendly concept of intergenerational slavery. And once our gold farm was complete, I decided to kidnap a piglin of the non-zombified variety for us to abuse through bartering. I then spent a while using our gold farm and bartering with our kidnapping victim in hopes of getting something we need. And quite luckily, we did manage to get some of the items we were after, as well as some iron, which was very exciting. I then made my way back to the overworld to spend even more time at my mob grinder, as I was desperate to get a potato, but alas, we still didn't get one. Defeated, I then went on to use my gold farm a tiny bit more and got to our next challenge, which was to get ourselves blaze rods. There were two reasons as to why I decided to risk my life in this rather stupid way. The first reason was that we needed a brewing stand, as well as some blaze powder, to get ourselves some potions of weakness so that we could convert our zombified villages into normal villagers. We also needed them to eventually make Eyes of Ender to locate the stronghold, as having wings would make my life slightly less dreadful. I was well aware that we could use a witch to convert our villagers, but since we needed blaze rods anyway, I decided to roll with this instead. And since we had gotten a fair amount of fire resistance potions from our piglin bartering slave, I didn't have to worry too much as I was bridging towards the fortress. But since the entire world, including the Nether, is basically just a massive void, we got way more mobs to spawn than I expected. However, since I had not been completely stupid and actually made some preparations before coming here, I actually managed to make my way onto the fortress somewhat safely. And to my surprise, we managed to get our hands on a wither skeleton skull almost instantly, which was very exciting. I then deployed the incredibly brave and heroic strategy of bullying blazes from afar to then run in to grab all of the drops to then run away in absolute terror. But soon after I had started deploying my brilliant strategy, I ran out of arrows. So for the last couple of blaze rods, I had to actually be somewhat brave and punch the blazes. And once I had collected enough blaze rods, I started making my way back towards my base, as I thought it might be a good idea to not die in the fortress. So I made my way back to my base of operations and crafted myself a brewing stand and got everything ready to convert my villagers. But I then remembered that you need brown mushrooms to craft fermented spider eyes, so I had to bridge to a mushroom island that was, quite luckily, rather close. And with this, we were finally able to convert our villagers to proceed with our next slavery operation. But not only that, shortly after our villagers had been converted, we also managed to finally get our hands on a potato, which meant that we could further expand our farming empire. So I converted some more gravel to dirt and started force growing our potato, so that we may start eating like the proper kings that we are. I then realized that we now had villagers, but nowhere to put them. So I decided to build yet another circular platform which we would use to house our future peasants. And once the platform was done, I built a simple and quick villager breeder and started luring our villagers towards it using the sweet temptation of sleep. Whilst we were waiting for our villagers to do their business to reproduce, I decided to be somewhat productive and build an iron farm, which I intended to use as our main source of emeralds to scam my future trading prisoners. However, I did make a few adjustments to the tutorial I was following, which would surely not come back to haunt me later. I then lured 3 villagers towards their new home, where they would spend the rest of their life in terror, so that I may benefit financially. I then had to wait for someone of the same intellectual prowess as me to make an appearance, to then have it put my villagers in a permanent state of fear. However, soon after I had finished the iron farm, I noticed that the iron golems would sometimes spawn inside the walls that I had built, which I found to be rather problematic. This made me think that there might have been a reason as to why the tutorial told me to use walls instead of full blocks, and that changing the design of a working farm may have been a less than optimal move. So I got to making a few adjustments to the farm to prevent the issue I was experiencing. However, as I was doing this, an iron golem decided to spawn on my cobblestone scaffolding, which led to the death of my zombie. But after having spent a bunch of time dealing with all the issues I had created for myself, I finally got the farm up and running. So I then went on to the next project, which was to set up some villages to trade with. So I built a simple array of pods, where they would spend the rest of their lives waiting for me to come and trade with them. I decided to start us off with a cleric, an armorer, as well as a weaponsmith, so that I could sell all of my rotten flesh as well as my iron. And after having spent some time leveling them up, I got my hands on full diamond armor as well as some diamond weapons, which would make our existence in this world a tiny bit more comfortable. I then realized that we were spending most of our time on our tiny cobblestone platform that we had built quite a while ago, so I thought it was probably time to start moving away from that and actually make things somewhat acceptable. So I built yet another platform where we would move our trees, as that was one of the main things that was still on our peasant-like cobblestone platform. And once that was done, and I had moved over all of our trees, I started work on the centerpiece of our base, which I was intending to be our living area. I decided that it would be pretty cool to have the center be a bunch of staircases leading up to a fountain, which I could then enter my actual base from. And once we had most of our things set up, I decided to do some cleanup by removing our initial cobblestone platform as well as the cobblestone bridge that we had built to get our hands on brown mushrooms. I also added our last farm on our farming platform, since we had some carrots lying around from when we tried to get a potato. But now that we had gotten our blaze rods as well as ender pearls from our cleric, we were ready to go and face a highly likely death in the end. So I chopped down a bunch of my spruce trees, which I intended to use to bridge towards the stronghold, and threw my first eye of ender to point us in the right direction. I then got on to the task of bridging towards my very likely doom, which in this case came in the form of a stronghold. And after what felt like 15 minutes and 41 seconds, I was finally able to see the stronghold. So I made my way inside the stronghold and wasted no time at all and activated the portal. Then began the incredibly epic and visually astounding battle with the Ender Dragon. Just kidding, it was a rather mundane battle, as I basically just spanked it to death with my over-glorified stick. But once the Ender Dragon had been dealt with, I grabbed the dragon egg and struggled for my life to get through the damn gateway that had spawned for us. And pretty much instantly, we managed to spot an end city, which also had a ship, which was very exciting. So then began the process of relocating someone else's belongings into my pockets. And once my immense greed had been satisfied, I jumped back into the end portal to get home. But this time, I decided to actually read what the end screen says. But since I have the patience and attention span of an average TikTok user, I got quite bored and skipped it. I then made my way back to the comfort of my home and started putting away all of the spoils from our very peaceful excursion. And since I managed to get quite a lot of diamond gear, I also started combining some of my items to get some pretty decent stuff. I then decided to attempt to get rid of my spruce bridge towards my stronghold, as I tried to keep my base looking somewhat clean. But I rather quickly came to the realization that fire doesn't spread as well as I had previously thought. So I decided to give up and just leave it. I then directed my attention to my villager platform, as it was looking rather ugly and was rather inefficient. So I decided to completely rebuild my villager breeder to add a proper minecart pickup system, since the current way we were doing it was pretty annoying. I also decided to fit a zombification station, since all of the villagers we needed at this point were for trading. However, getting the zombie for our zombie fire proved to be a bit more cumbersome than I had initially thought, as the first zombie I tried to lure in was completely decimated by a rogue iron golem. But I did manage to trap the second zombie, which was very exciting. I then tore down the trading area for our villagers to build a bigger and decorated one. And since we now had our wings, I was now able to visit all of the other islands in the nearby vicinity without leaving a bunch of ugly bridges. So I flew over to the nearby mangrove island and grabbed some of the wood, as I thought it would look rather nice for the roofs on our villager platform. I then got back to decorating our villager platform, but once I got to decorating the actual villager breeder, I thought that I would try to make a sort of wizard-like roof. But it ended up looking like a violently erect nipple, which wasn't the aesthetic I was going for, so I made a normal roof instead. But now that our villager platform was looking slightly more presentable, I thought it might be a good idea to set up some more villagers to get our hands on unbreaking and mending. This was, just like always, a very exciting process. However, in addition to getting mending and unbreaking, we also got access to both bookshelves as well as lanterns, which made our humble abode a tiny bit more habitable. And whilst we were on a decoration spree, I thought it might be a good idea to decorate our main island a tiny bit, since it had a bunch of holes that led straight down into the void, which I am sure violated several OSHA regulations. My plan for these gaps was to fill them with dirt and place a bunch of flowers, which would hopefully make my base a tiny bit more colourful. So I made my way to my gold farm and started bartering in hopes of getting some gravel, which we could turn into dirt. I then made my way back and flew to a few other islands to collect their foliage, as well as their precious dirt. And once that was done, I got to placing all of the dirt I had accumulated, and whilst we were waiting for the grass to spread to all of the dirt, we managed to get chickens to spawn, which was very exciting. So I trapped them in an enclosure out of fences, which was where they would come to spend the rest of their lives. But now that we were done with our decorations, at least for the moment, I remembered that we actually managed to get 2 wither skeleton skulls from when we were farming blazes. So I thought it would be a pretty nice flex to get a beacon for our Skyblock world, and dove back into the Nether to grab ourselves the final wither skeleton skull that we needed. I then flew over to the stronghold, as I had absolutely no intentions whatsoever to fight the wither legitimately. So I utilized the good old technique of spawning the wither into the bedrock portal to then spank it from where it can't fight back. I then got back to my base once more and did a tiny bit of final decorating, and managed to get some pigs to spawn on my main platform, so I caught them just like I had with the chickens. But with that, our 24 hours were up, so there we have it. I spent 24 hours in this Skyblock world. Overall, I'm quite happy with all of the things that we've been able to do in this world, as we managed to kill the Ender Dragon and the Wither, and managed to build a somewhat halfway presentable base. But anyways, I hope you've enjoyed the ride. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.